The elevator doors closed behind me with a whisper that sounded like finality itself, sealing off 43 floors of lies, marble corridors, and the scent of his cologne. Bergamot and cedar, the fragrance of calculated power. My reflection stared back at me from the polished brass, eyes too bright, jaw too tight, the silk blouse he'd once complimented. Now feeling like armor I could finally shed. The file folder in my trembling hands contained my resignation, effective immediately, but what it really held was my refusal to be invisible anymore. In a penthouse office where decisions worth billions were made while I was dismissed as merely efficient. 3 years. 3 years of watching Callister Vance build an empire on charm and cruelty, of scheduling his conquests and managing his disasters, of being brilliant enough to save him and invisible enough to be forgotten. But this morning, I'd overheard him on a call, his voice cold as winter glass, describing me as adequately useful but entirely replaceable to someone who mattered. The words had struck like ice water, and suddenly every compromise I'd made crystallized into a single truth. I'd been surviving in his shadow when I should have been building my own light. The lobby of Vance Global stretched before me like a cathedral to capitalism. Travertine floors, water features that cost more than houses, security guards in hand-tailored charcoal suits. I'd walked through here 1,000 times. Today, for the first time, I walked through it towards something instead of away from myself. If you're facing a moment where you must choose your dignity over someone else's empire, where walking away feels like falling, but is actually the first step toward flight, this story is your companion. May you find the courage to leave what diminishes you, the wisdom to recognize your own worth, and the strength to discover that sometimes the best revenge is becoming so magnificently yourself that their world seems small in comparison. If you're with Mr. Douglas Stories, comment. Tell us where you are watching from. 6 months before I walked out, I thought I understood the shape of my life. I lived in a converted industrial loft in the Riverside Quarter, the part of the city where artists and overworked professionals coexisted in exposed brick and questionable plumbing. My apartment had 13-foot ceilings and windows that offered a sliver view of the financial district, where Vance Global's chrome and glass tower pierced the skyline like an exclamation point made of money. Every morning began the same way. 5:30 alarm, espresso from the machine I'd saved 3 months to afford, subway ride where I reviewed Callister's schedule on my tablet, arrival at the office before 7 to ensure his day began frictionlessly. His coffee, single origin Ethiopian, precisely 185 degrees, no sugar, had to be on his desk by 7:45. His dry cleaning retrieved from the European place on Lexington. His lunch reservations confirmed at restaurants where tables cost what I paid monthly in rent. I was good at it, frighteningly good. I anticipated needs before they were spoken, solved problems before they became crises, and made a man worth $8 billion believe his life ran on magic rather than my relentless competence. "You're wasted here," my best friend Imani would say during our rare coffee dates. She worked in tech, climbed the ladder with sharp elbows and sharper code. You could be running your own company with half your talent. But talent needs opportunity, and opportunity needs capital or connections. I had neither. What I had was a salary that kept me just comfortable enough to not quit, benefits that covered my mother's medications, and the strange pride of being essential to someone powerful, even if he'd never admit it. Callister Vance was the kind of beautiful that felt weaponized, tall enough to dominate rooms, built like he actually used the private gym on the 42nd floor, with dark hair going distinguished at the temples and eyes the colour of expensive scotch. He wore suits that cost more than cars, Brioni, chiton, occasionally Xenia when he wanted to seem approachable, and moved through the world as if it had been designed for his convenience, which, largely, it had been. He'd inherited Vance Global from his father, but transformed it from a successful conglomerate into a titan of acquisitions and venture capital. Under his leadership, the company had doubled its value. Markets responded to his name. Politicians returned his calls. The business press wrote about him in reverent tones, usually reserved for profits. What they didn't write about were the moments I witnessed in the silent spaces between his public performances. The way his jaw tightened when his younger brother Paxton called, voice crackling through the speakerphone with barely disguised resentment. The exhaustion that settled into his features late at night when he thought he was alone in the office. The controlled violence in how he'd shattered a crystal tumbler after a board meeting, then calmly asked me to arrange for replacement glassware, as if fury were just another task to be managed. He was complicated, brilliant, occasionally almost kind in moments so brief I'd convinced myself I'd imagined them, and he had no idea who I really was. Before Vance Global, I'd completed dual masters in business strategy and data analytics at Kensington State. I'd published research on market prediction models that had been cited in 3 major journals. I'd been recruited by 7 firms before my mother's medical crisis derailed everything, sending me scrambling for immediate income rather than strategic career building. The executive assistant position had been temporary, a bridge, a way to stay in the industry while I regrouped. 3 years later, the bridge had become my entire landscape. The morning everything shattered began unremarkably. I arrived at 6:53, earlier than usual. The executive floor was silent, except for the whisper of climate control and the distant hum of cleaning crews finishing their overnight work. Callister's office occupied the entire southwest corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the river and the old financial district. Furniture in butter-soft leather and dark wood. A bar cart stocked with bottles worth more than my monthly salary. I was updating his calendar when I heard his voice. He was in his private conference room, door slightly ajar, speaking on what I recognized as his encrypted line, the phone he used for conversations he didn't want recorded or remembered. The analyst position? His tone was different from his public voice, colder, edged with something cruel. Adequately useful, but entirely replaceable. Competent enough for data entry, but lacks the strategic vision for anything significant. Why are you asking? My breath stopped. He was talking about me. The analyst position had been my dream. A role on the strategy team that I'd mentioned to him once. Carefully, casually, hoping he might recommend me. He'd nodded, said he'd keep it in mind, and I'd held on to those words like they meant something. Promote from within? No. His laugh was acid. That role needs someone who can think 3 moves ahead. She follows instructions beautifully. But initiative? Vision? I've seen no evidence of it. Find someone from the outside, someone hungry. The file folder I'd been holding slipped from my numb fingers, papers whispering against carpet. Someone hungry. as if I hadn't been starving this entire time, feeding him my ideas disguised as his insights, my strategies dressed up as his brilliance. As if initiative meant anything when you were kept so busy managing someone else's life that your own dreams became hypothetical. I stood there in my theory dress and sensible heels, in the office I'd arrived at before dawn for 1,000 days, and felt something crack open inside me. Not heartbreak. I'd never been foolish enough to romanticize him. This was colder, clearer. It was the sound of illusions dying. I gathered the papers with mechanical precision, returned to my desk, and opened a blank document. My resignation letter wrote itself in 4 sentences. Professional, gracious, lying. Dear Mr. Vance, please accept this as notice of my immediate resignation from the position of executive assistant. I am grateful for the opportunities provided during my tenure at Vance Global. I trust you will find my replacement both useful and replaceable. Best regards. I printed it on the heavy cardstock he preferred, placed it in a leather portfolio, and walked into his office at 7:43. 2 minutes before his coffee would be ready. He was at his desk, reviewing market reports. Sunlight turning his profile into something classical and remote. "You're early," he said, without looking up. "Good. I need you to reschedule the merger meeting. Caldwell is stalling, and I want to make him uncomfortable by—" "I'm resigning." My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "Effective immediately." His head lifted slowly, expression shifting from distraction to something sharper. "Excuse me?" "My resignation." I placed the portfolio on his desk, exactly centered. "I've detailed transition notes for my replacement. Assuming you find someone adequately useful." His eyes narrowed. For a moment, I thought he might have realized I'd overheard him. But no. Callister Vance didn't think about whether others heard him. He assumed his words only mattered to their intended audience. "This is unexpected." He leaned back, studying me with the focus he usually reserved for hostile takeover targets. "May I ask what prompted this decision?" "A better opportunity." The lie tasted like freedom. I could match any offer. It wasn't a question. Callister didn't beg, he negotiated. Some opportunities can't be matched with money. I held his gaze, let him see something he'd never bothered to look for before, the person beneath the efficiency. "I've been adequately useful here, Mr. Vance. Now I'm choosing to be extraordinary somewhere else." I watched the words land, watched confusion flicker across his features. For 3 years, I'd been a perfectly managed element of his perfectly managed life. Assistants didn't quit. Not the good ones, not without warning. "If this is about the analyst position," he began. "It's not." Another lie. "But thank you for the concern." I turned toward the door, each step feeling like reclaiming stolen territory. "Wait." His voice had changed, lost some of its executive polish. "You can't just leave. We're in the middle of the Halcyon merger, the Tokyo expansion, the— You'll manage." I paused at the threshold, allowed myself one last look at the office that had contained so much of my life. "You always do, and I'm sure whoever you hire will be much more strategically valuable." His face did something complicated then. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. But I didn't wait to decipher it. I walked past my desk, past the coffee machine that held exactly his preference, past 3 years of making myself small enough to fit into his organized world. The elevator arrived like salvation, and as those brass doors closed, sealing me away from Vance Global's 43rd floor. I felt the first true breath I'd taken in years fill my lungs with possibility. I didn't know then that walking out would set off a chain reaction that would expose him, transform me, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a powerful man is stop being useful to him. The real story was just beginning. The interview invitation arrived on my phone 3 days after I'd walked out, a time period I'd spent alternatively euphoric with freedom and terrified by my bank account's rapid countdown towards zero. North Haven Capital requests your presence for preliminary discussions regarding the position of Strategic Director. Friday, 2 p.m. Address enclosed, North Haven Capital. I'd heard whispers, a boutique investment firm that had emerged in the last 18 months, quietly aggressive, taking positions in companies just before they exploded or imploded. Smart money, dangerous money, the kind of operation that made even Vance Global nervous. I arrived 15 minutes early to a building in the Cathedral District. All Gothic Revival architecture mixed with modern glass. The kind of place where old money pretended to be comfortable with new money's methods. The receptionist was impeccably polite and deeply disinterested, directing me to the 14th floor. The elevator was the old kind, brass fixtures, mahogany panels, the gentle mechanism of wealth that didn't need to prove anything. The doors opened to a space that made me recalibrate everything I'd thought about understated luxury. Where Vance Global screamed success, North Haven whispered dominance. Dark wood, leather chairs worn perfectly with age, paintings that might have been original Rothkos, and silence so complete it felt intentional, as if they'd purchased the absence of noise along with the real estate. "They're ready for you." A woman in an impeccably tailored suit gestured toward double doors. "Ms. Chevalier will conduct the interview personally." Rosalind Chevalier. The name was legendary, a financier who'd made her first billion by 30, disappeared from public life for 5 years, then emerged to build North Haven into something both feared and coveted. I'd seen exactly 3 photographs of her, all deliberately unclear, as if she'd purchased her own privacy. I straightened my blazer and walked into the conference room. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s perhaps, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that processed information faster than most people could speak. She sat at the head of a table that could have seated 20, alone, except for a single file folder. My file folder. "Sit." "Not rude, just efficient." I sat. "You walked out on Callister Vance 3 days ago." She didn't open the folder. "Immediate resignation, no notice. 3 years of exemplary service ended with a 4-sentence letter that managed to be professional and devastating in equal measure." My pulse quickened. "You work quickly. I work constantly." She studied me with the focus of someone used to assessing value. "Tell me why you left." I could have lied, should have lied. Instead, I told the truth. I overheard him describing me as adequately useful but lacking strategic vision. I'd been feeding him insights and strategies for 3 years, carefully packaged as his own thoughts, because that's what the role required. When I finally asked for recognition for a position that would let me use my actual capabilities, he dismissed me without even realizing the ideas he'd been taking credit for were mine. Something flickered in her expression. Approval, maybe. "What did you study?" she asked. "Dual masters, business strategy and data analytics. Published research on market prediction models before." I stopped. before your mother got sick and you needed immediate income rather than long-term planning. She tapped the folder. I know. I also know your thesis predicted the semiconductor consolidation 18 months before it happened, and your model for identifying acquisition targets has a 93% accuracy rate over 5 years. I stared at her. How? I make it my business to know who's brilliant and underutilized. She leaned forward slightly. Callister Vance is a competent inheritor playing at being a visionary. You were the actual visionary, and he was too stupid to recognize it. His loss. Potentially my gain. What's the position? I managed. Strategic Director. You'll assess potential investments, identify market movements before they happen, and advise on acquisitions. Starting salary is $375,000 with performance bonuses that could double that. You'll have a team of 4 analysts, full benefits, and equity positions in successful plays. The number hit me like vertigo. That was more than 5 times what Vance had paid me. There's a complication, Rosalind continued, voice cooling slightly. North Haven has been positioning itself to acquire several properties currently in Vance Global's portfolio. We're not hostile, we're opportunistic. But it means you'll likely be in proximity to your former employer during negotiations and transitions. Ah, there it was. You want me because I know how Callister thinks, I said slowly. I want you because you're brilliant, she corrected. The fact that you understand Vance's patterns is useful, but I could get that from a dozen sources. What I can't get elsewhere is someone who can predict market movements with your accuracy while also understanding the human psychology that drives those movements. You've been studying Callister Vance like a master class in executive behavior. Now I'm offering you the chance to use that education. She slid a contract across the table. 3-year commitment. Non-compete clause excludes only direct competitors, not former employers. If you're afraid of facing him, I'm not afraid. The words came out sharper than intended, but I won't sabotage him deliberately. I won't share confidential information or use insider knowledge unethically. Rosalind smiled, the first real expression I'd seen from her. Good. I don't want someone who'll compromise their principles for revenge. I want someone who'll beat him fairly and then watch him realize what he lost. She pulled a fountain pen from her jacket. Mont Blanc, vintage, the kind of object that held stories, and placed it beside the contract. Sign this, and Monday morning you start, building the career that should have been yours all along, or walk away, and I'll respect it. But know this, Callister Vance is about to face challenges he's not prepared for, and I'd rather have you on my side when everything shifts. My hand reached for the pen before my brain had fully processed the decision. Sometimes the body knows before the mind catches up. I signed my name, clear, bold, permanent. Welcome to North Haven, Rosalind said. And fair warning, the first project I'm assigning you involves the Meridian Towers acquisition. Vance Global has been courting that property for 6 months. We're going to take it from them. My first Monday at North Haven began with an office that had windows. Not the manufactured view from a borrowed conference room or the corridor glimpse I'd caught during coffee runs. Real windows, floor to ceiling, facing east so morning light turned everything golden. A desk made from reclaimed wood that felt like art. Bookshelves waiting to be filled. And a team of 4 analysts who looked at me with a mix of curiosity and caution, trying to figure out what kind of director I'd be. Team meeting in 30, I told them. voice steadier than I felt. Bring coffee and your most recent market analyses. I want to understand how you think. I spent the first hour learning their names, their backgrounds, their ambitions. Kenji had a statistics PhD and a dry sense of humor. Lara spoke 4 languages and specialized in international markets. Matteo came from academia with a focus on behavioral economics, and Jen was the youngest, barely out of graduate school, but with instincts that apparently bordered on prophetic. We've been tracking the Meridian Towers situation, Jen said, pulling up a presentation that made my former data management look like kindergarten finger painting. Vance Global's been negotiating for 6 months. They're offering above market value, but the owners are stalling. Why? I asked. Pride, Matteo interjected. The Meridian family built that property over 3 generations. Vance's approach has been all money, no respect. They want someone who understands legacy, not just profit margins. I pulled up my own research, notes I'd started compiling the moment I'd signed with North Haven. Vance's strategy assumes everyone's motivated by maximum return. He doesn't account for emotional value or generational pride. If we approach them differently, understanding that the towers represents their family's entire identity, Lara finished, and position ourselves as stewards rather than acquirers. We're not just buying property, Kenji added. We're honoring legacy while creating future value. I looked at my team, this group of brilliant people who were now my responsibility and my resource, and felt something click into place. Draft a proposal, I said. But first, I want research on every member of the Meridian family, not just financials, what they care about, what they've built, what they want their legacy to be. We're going to speak their language, not ours. The energy in the room shifted. This was different from the reactive assistance I'd provided Callister. This was creation, strategy, building something rather than maintaining someone else's vision. Within 2 weeks, we'd secured a meeting with the Meridian family. I prepared like I was defending a dissertation, understanding not just their business, but their values, their history, their dreams for what those towers could become. The meeting took place in their family office, a converted brownstone in the Heritage District, walls covered with photographs spanning 80 years of construction and community. Richard Meridian was the patriarch, 72, sharp-eyed, wearing a cardigan that had probably cost $20 30 years ago. His daughter Catherine handled the day-to-day operations, and his grandson Jonathan was being groomed to take over. 3 generations sitting across from me, waiting to be impressed or dismissed. Ms. Chevalier speaks highly of you, Richard began. Says you understand what matters beyond balance sheets. I understand that your grandfather didn't build the Meridian Towers just to make money, I replied. He built them because he believed buildings could improve neighborhoods. That architecture was a form of community service. That legacy matters more than profit. Richard's eyes sharpened with interest. You've read his speeches. I've studied his philosophy, and I think North Haven can honor it while ensuring the towers remain relevant for another 3 generations. Not through renovation, but through evolution, maintaining your grandfather's vision while adapting it for contemporary needs. I walked them through our proposal, not just financial terms, but a partnership structure where their family maintained advisory roles, where ground floor spaces would prioritize local businesses, where design choices would honor the original architectural intent. Vance Global offered us 30% above market, Catherine said. Your offer is competitive, but not higher. Why should we choose you? Because Vance Global sees your towers as assets, I replied carefully. We see them as legacy. When Vance negotiates, they're buying property. When North Haven partners, we're becoming stewards of something meaningful. Your family built these towers over 3 generations. We want to ensure they matter for 3 more. The silence that followed felt pregnant with possibility. Your former employer never asked us about our grandfather's vision, Richard said quietly. Never inquired about what the towers meant beyond their market value. You're the first person from any firm who seemed to understand that buildings can have souls. By the end of the meeting, they'd agreed to preliminary contracts. By the end of the month, the deal was signed. And by the time the business press reported it, Callister Vance was learning that I wasn't just good at scheduling his life. I was exceptional at dismantling his plans. The Ashmont Foundation gala invitation arrived with a note from Rosalind. Black tie, Saturday, 5,000 per plate. Callister will be there. Dress for power, not approval. I stood in my apartment looking at my closet, realizing everything I owned had been chosen to be invisible or appropriate for someone else's standards. I owned exactly 0 dresses suitable for facing down a billionaire. Imani arrived like a force of nature. We're going shopping now. I can't afford. You're making $375,000, she interrupted. You can afford 1 perfect dress. Consider it an investment in psychological warfare. We found it in a boutique I'd walked past 100 times but never entered. The dress was the color of deep water, cut to suggest sophistication rather than trying too hard. It cost more than my first car. This, Imani declared, is the dress of someone who left and became legendary. Saturday evening, I walked up the museum steps in that dress, in shoes that made me 3 inches taller, feeling transformed into who I'd always been underneath the performance. The gala hall was full of people who believed that their money made them matter. Champagne in crystal. Conversations measured in deal value. And at the centre, near the Monet painting, loaned specifically for this event, stood Callister Vance. He looked exactly as expected. Tuxedo fitted perfectly, hair carelessly perfect, surrounded by people who orbited wealth. He hadn't seen me yet. Rosalind appeared beside me. You look dangerous. Good. The Meridian family is here. Stay close. She guided me through the crowd with practiced ease. We approached the Meridians near the sculpture gallery. Richard, Catherine, Jonathan. Rosalind greeted them. I'd like you to meet our strategic director again. The one who's been ensuring your legacy is honored. We talked about the towers, about the upcoming transition, about their grandfather's vision coming to life in new forms. The conversation was warm, genuine, everything a business relationship should be. And across the gallery, through the crowd of tuxedos and evening gowns, Callister Vance was staring at me. His expression was complicated. Surprise, confusion, something that looked like recognition, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Our eyes met. I raised my champagne flute slightly, a gesture that could have meant anything. He started moving toward me with the determination of someone unused to confusion. Incoming, Rosalind murmured. Remember, competition, not employee. Callister cut through the crowd with practiced ease. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Still bergamot and cedar. Still weaponized. You look He paused, searching for words. Different. I am different, I said evenly. Or maybe I'm exactly the same, and you're just seeing it for the first time. His jaw tightened slightly. Rosalind. He acknowledged her with careful politeness. I wasn't aware you'd hired my former assistant. Your former assistant, Rosalind replied with blade-sharp courtesy, is now my strategic director, and she's brilliant at it. Thank you for training her so well. The insult landed beautifully, suggesting anything valuable I'd learned came from him, while highlighting that he'd been too blind to recognize it. The Meridian deal, he said, switching to business. You're wasting your time. They're accepting my offer this week. Are they? I kept my voice pleasant, because I just had a fascinating conversation with them about legacy and stewardship. They seemed quite interested in our approach. His eyes narrowed. You used confidential information. You know their negotiation position because you scheduled those meetings. I used public information and basic human empathy, I corrected. Something your approach apparently lacked. I never needed confidential information to understand people, Callister. I just needed you to stop talking long enough to listen. The use of his first name, casual, familiar, stripped of deference, landed like a small detonation. We should talk, he said, voice lowering. Privately. Why? I tilted my head slightly. Are you afraid your adequately useful former assistant might be more strategically valuable than you assessed? I watched him realize I'd heard that phone call, watched the calculation happen behind his expensive Scotch eyes. That conversation was illuminating, I finished. It taught me that I'd been making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. Thank you for that lesson. It's proving quite valuable. I turned to Rosalind. If you'll excuse me, I see someone from the Meridian Foundation I should speak with. I walked away from Callister Vance in the middle of his own sentence, in a room full of people who mattered, wearing a dress that cost a month of what he'd paid me. Behind me, I could feel his confusion turning into something more complicated. The gala continued around us, but something fundamental had shifted. I'd stopped being his memory and become his competition, and he had no idea how to handle it. Later that night, standing on the museum terrace with city lights turning the river golden, he found me again. Running away from the party, his voice closer than expected. I turned. He stood in the doorway, jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened, looking more human than I'd seen him at any business event. Taking a moment, I replied. Something I rarely got to do when I was managing your moments. He moved closer. I owe you an apology. Of all the things I'd expected, that wasn't one of them. For which part? I kept my voice light. The part where you took credit for my insights, the part where you dismissed my capabilities, or the part where you paid me a fraction of what I was worth while treating me as adequately useful? He flinched. All of it. You were the best assistant I've ever had, and I was too focused on my own empire to realize you should have been building yours. Assistant, I repeated. That's still how you see it. Not strategist. Not the person whose market analyses were running your company. Assistant. That's not... He stopped, struggling. I didn't realize how smart you are, how much of my success was actually yours. You didn't realize because you never looked, I said. I was useful, so you used me. I was efficient, so you never questioned whether I might be capable of more. You saw what you needed to see, and nothing else. And now? His voice was strange. Now you're brilliant and dangerous, And I'm standing here wondering how I missed it. You missed it because I let you, I admitted. Because I was afraid to take up space. Because I thought making you successful would eventually lead to my own success. I was wrong. He was quiet, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. What if I said I wanted you back? The question came out rough, unpolished. Not as assistant, as partner, equal. Someone who shapes strategy instead of just implementing it. I studied him, this man who'd contained so much of my life, who looked genuinely confused by his own offer. You don't want me back, I said gently. You want to win. You want to neutralize the threat I represent and reclaim what you perceive as yours. But I was never yours, Callister. I was always mine. You just didn't notice. What if you're wrong? His voice had an edge. What if I'm standing here realizing I had someone extraordinary and I was too blind to see it? Then you're 6 months too late. I set down my champagne glass. Because I'm not interested in being extraordinary in your orbit. I'm building my own. I moved toward the door. He called after me. The Meridian deal, that's mine. I've been working it for months. I paused, looked back. No, it was yours. Now it's contested. Welcome to competition, Callister. Try not to take it personally when you lose. I left him on the terrace, silhouetted against city lights, looking for the first time like something other than a man who always won. The photographs arrived on Monday morning. An email from an anonymous sender. No subject line. Just images. Me and Callister on the museum terrace, closer than I'd remembered. Me, leaving late-night meetings at Vance Global from 3 years ago. Me in his office, reaching across his desk, cropped to look intimate. Below them, interesting working relationship you have with your former employer. Would hate for this to complicate your credibility at North Haven. My blood went cold. A second email arrived immediately. You took something that belonged to him. Expect consequences. I called Rosalind. We have a problem. Within an hour, I was in her office, showing her the emails. She studied them with clinical calm. Paxton, Callister's younger brother, he specializes in disinformation and corporate sabotage. When Callister's company faces real threat, Paxton emerges to eliminate it by any means necessary. They're going to make it look like I'm feeding you information from Vance Global, I said slowly. Corporate espionage, maybe even a romantic relationship that compromised my objectivity. Exactly. Rosalind set down my tablet. The photograph gives them just enough credibility to make accusations stick in the press, even if eventually disproven. Your reputation gets destroyed, I'm forced to fire you, and Callister eliminates his problem without breaking laws. What do we do? She smiled, cold and calculating. We expose them first. Before they weaponize this, we control the narrative. You give an interview explaining why you left Vance Global and why you joined North Haven. We make you the story of someone underestimated who rose above it. Then, when they release photographs, it looks like retaliation rather than revelation. That makes me the target. You're already the target, she replied. This ensures you're a target who controls the story. The interview was arranged for the following week with Business Quarterly, the most respected publication in corporate journalism. But Sunday night, 3 more photographs arrived. Monday's interview won't save you. We have enough to destroy your credibility and North Haven's. Walk away or we publish everything. I forwarded everything to Rosalind. Her response was single sentence. Don't back down. We have contingencies. The interview took place Monday afternoon. The journalist, Olivia Hart, was known for fairness and devastating accuracy. "Let's start with the obvious question," she began. "You worked for Callister Vance for 3 years. Now you're competing directly with your former employer. Some might see that as opportunistic. Others might see it as revenge. How do you see it?" "I see it as overdue recognition of my actual capabilities," I said. "For 3 years, I provided strategic analysis and business insights while being compensated as administrative support. I didn't leave for revenge. I left because I was ready to stop being useful to someone else's vision and start building my own." "But you're working for Rosalind Chevalier, who has her own complicated history with Vance." "The difference is that Rosalind recognizes my value and compensates me accordingly. She hired me for my strategic mind, not my efficiency at scheduling. At Vance Global, I was a secret weapon they didn't know they had. At North Haven, I'm a strategic director with authority to make decisions." The interview lasted 90 minutes. I answered every question honestly, maintained professional composure, refused to be baited into emotional responses. When it ended, I felt cautiously victorious. The article published Wednesday morning, From Assistant to Architect, Inside the Rise of North Haven's Strategic Director. For 4 hours, I thought I'd won. Then the photographs started appearing on gossip sites and anonymous blogs. The images I'd been sent, plus dozens more, all captioned to suggest impropriety. North Haven director's secret relationship with Vance CEO, corporate romance, or corporate espionage. The real reason she left Vance Global. Within hours, my credibility was being systematically destroyed across the internet. My phone rang. Unknown number. Against better judgment, I answered. "You should have walked away." The voice was smooth, educated, utterly cold. "I gave you the opportunity to resign quietly. Now the entire industry thinks you're trading on insider knowledge. How does that feel?" "Like you're terrified of actual competition," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "If I were incompetent, you wouldn't need to destroy my reputation. The fact that you're doing this proves I'm a threat." "You're not a threat," Paxton said softly. "You're a problem, and I solve problems. By Friday, you'll have no credibility, no allies, and no future in this industry." He hung up. I sat in my office, surrounded by luxury I'd finally earned, looking at a future that suddenly felt precarious. But beneath the fear, something harder was crystallizing. Paxton had made a mistake. He'd shown his hand, revealed his tactics, and I'd learned from watching powerful people play dirty for 3 years. The war had been declared. Now it was time to fight it. By Thursday, 3 companies we'd been courting backed out, citing concerns about North Haven's internal practices. 2 major investors requested meetings with Rosalind to discuss recent developments. The Harbour Quarter project, our best chance at vindication, hit unexpected complications. Friday afternoon, Rosalind called me into her office. "The board met this morning. They're concerned about the negative attention. They've suggested that for North Haven's good, you consider temporary leave." "You're suspending me," I said flatly. "I'm telling you what they suggested. I haven't decided what I'm doing yet." She pulled out a folder. "Here's another option." Inside were documents, financial records, property deeds, corporate filings. "Paxton Vance's actual business interests," Rosalind said. "He operates through shell companies, but I've had investigators tracking him for 3 years. He owns pieces of the Harbour Quarter property. He's been blocking our deal while simultaneously destroying anyone who threatens Vance Global. He's sabotaging us directly, protecting Callister's interests while destroying threats. It's elegant. He operates in shadows while his brother maintains deniability. She tapped the folder. But shadows mean vulnerability. If we reveal his holdings, we expose conflict of interest, market manipulation, securities violations. And destroy him completely, I said slowly. Yes, but going nuclear means investigations, lawsuits, media attention consuming months. North Haven will survive, but you become the person who exposed a billionaire's secrets. Paxton will retaliate, not with gossip, with lawyers, investigators, every resource at his disposal. So either I disappear quietly or fight and risk everything. What do you want to do? I looked at the evidence, thought about walking away, protecting myself, accepting that some battles weren't worth fighting. Then I thought about every person who'd walked away before me, who'd let powerful men determine their futures. I want to fight, I said, but not just for me. If we expose Paxton, we expose the whole system that lets men like him operate in shadows. We make this matter beyond personal vendetta. Rosalind's expression shifted. Surprise, then approval. That's ambitious and dangerous. I'm done being safe, I said. She nodded decisively. Then we move forward. But you need to understand what you're risking. She pulled out another folder. Thicker, marked confidential. Vance Global is failing, she said quietly. Has been for 18 months. Callister's been hiding it through creative accounting. The Meridian deal, he needed it for liquidity, not expansion. Every property he's pursuing isn't growth, it's survival. I stared at the numbers. Losses in hundreds of millions, carefully distributed to avoid detection. He's been building an empire on borrowed time, Rosalind continued, and you were so good at managing his image, you helped hide it from everyone, including yourself. The reason he wants you back isn't because he values you. It's because you're one of the few people who could help him salvage this disaster. The revelation hit like ice water. Why are you telling me this? Because when we expose Paxton, Callister's finances will come under scrutiny. Everything will collapse. I want you to decide whether you're comfortable with that level of destruction before we pull the trigger. I looked at the evidence of Callister's failure, thought about the man who'd dismissed my capabilities while relying on them to maintain his facade of success. He built this, I said slowly. His choices, his risks, his ego. I'm not responsible for protecting him from consequences. Even if those consequences destroy him completely. I met her eyes. He had 3 years to treat me with respect. He chose differently. Now he faces the results. That's cold, Rosalind observed. That's justice, I corrected. She smiled, genuinely pleased. Then we're in agreement. Monday morning, we file everything. That night, unable to sleep, I paced my apartment, thinking about the chain reaction we were about to trigger. My phone rang at 2 a.m. Callister. I know what Rosalind is planning. His voice was rough, exhausted. I know she has evidence about Paxton, about my finances. I know you're going to expose everything. Then you know I'm not backing down. I'm not asking you to back down. He paused. I'm asking if we can meet, talk, before everything becomes irreversible. Why? Because I owe you the truth about why I hired you, about what you actually meant to the company, about what you mean. He stopped. Please, one conversation. Against every instinct, I agreed. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. The park across from the Riverside Museum. Public space. No games. No games, he agreed. Saturday afternoon was unexpectedly beautiful. I arrived early at the park, positioned myself with clear sightlines, activated the recording app Rosalind's security team had installed. Callister appeared exactly on time, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual armor. He looked younger, more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting beside me with careful distance. "You have 20 minutes. Then I'm going back to planning how to destroy everything you've built." He flinched. "You've gotten harder. I've gotten clearer." I turned to face him. "You said you wanted to give me the truth, so give it." He was quiet, watching children play across the grass. "I hired you because you were brilliant," he said finally. "My recruiter sent 50 candidates. You were the only one who'd done actual research on my company, who'd identified problems before I'd articulated them, who asked questions that revealed strategic thinking. I knew immediately you were overqualified for an assistant position." I waited. "I hired you anyway, because I was selfish. I thought I could use your brilliance while keeping you in a support role, keep you close enough to be useful, but contained enough that you wouldn't threaten my position. It was calculated, manipulative, and I told myself it was just good business." "It was exploitation," I said flatly. "Yes." He didn't soften it. "For 3 years, you made me more successful than I deserved. Your insights, your strategies, your ability to understand patterns. I passed all of it off as my own vision, while paying you a fraction of what you were worth. Why admit this now? Because in 3 days, Rosalind exposes Paxton's dealings, which triggers investigations into Vance Global's finances, which reveals my empire is built on unsustainable debt. Everything collapses. I lose the company, probably face criminal charges, spend the next decade defending myself in court." He looked at me directly. "And you'll be the person who set it in motion. I'm not responsible for your choices." "No, but you're choosing whether to pull the trigger, knowing exactly what the consequences will be. Hundreds of people work for Vance Global, good people who depend on those jobs. When the company collapses, they lose everything through no fault of their own." "Emotional manipulation," I observed, "trying to make me feel guilty for exposing your corruption by focusing on collateral damage you created." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm asking you to consider whether revenge is worth the cost to people who have nothing to do with how I treated you." "This isn't revenge," I said. "This is justice. You built a company on exploitation and deception. You maintained it by undervaluing people. Now you're facing consequences. And you want me to protect you because innocent people might suffer. But innocent people have been suffering all along, including me." "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "What outcome makes this worth it?" I considered the question. "I want you to understand what you did. Not intellectually, but actually understand what it feels like to be brilliant and invisible. To have your ideas stolen and contributions dismissed. To be told you're adequately useful while being fundamentally essential. I want you to know that feeling in your bones, and then I want you to spend the rest of your life doing better." "And Paxton?" "Paxton built his career on destroying people. He doesn't get to walk away." Callister nodded slowly. "Fair. But I'm asking, not for me, for the people whose lives depend on Vance Global. Is there a way to expose Paxton without completely destroying the company?" I studied him. "Maybe," I said. If you're willing to tell the truth, all of it, public confession about your finances, your methods, your exploitation, including of me, if you're willing to face consequences rather than hide behind lawyers, I'll consider restructuring the exposure to minimize collateral damage. You want me to fall on my sword publicly? I want you to tell the truth and accept accountability. He looked at me for a long moment. You've changed. 3 months ago, you would have accepted any explanation because you wanted to believe I was better than I am. 3 months ago, I was still performing for your approval. Now I'm done performing. I like this version of you, he said quietly, even though she terrifies me. Good. Fear means you're finally paying attention. I stood to leave. He caught my wrist, gentle, not restraining. What if I said I've realized something? These past months, watching you build something remarkable. What if I said I've fallen for the person you actually are instead of the useful assistant I convinced myself you were? I looked at his hand, then his face. I'd say you're in love with your own loss, not with me. You're mourning the version of me that made you comfortable, not celebrating the version that challenges you. That's not love. That's ego. I pulled free. Monday morning, I'm filing everything. If you want to minimize damage, meet with Rosalind Sunday and negotiate terms. Bring lawyers, bring evidence of good faith, but bring the truth or don't bother. Sunday morning, someone leaked preliminary information. The press ran stories about potential irregularities at Vance Global. I called Rosalind. Did you leak this? No, which means someone else did, someone controlling the narrative before we present evidence. Paxton, getting ahead of it. We need to file everything today. Now. Within hours, comprehensive evidence was submitted to financial regulators, securities commissions, investigative journalists. By evening, the story was everywhere. Vance Global faces investigation for securities fraud undisclosed. Conflicts of interest in development deals. CEO's brother accused of market manipulation and buried in coverage. Investigation sparked by evidence provided by former executive assistant turned strategic director. The press conference Tuesday was held at North Haven in a room designed for exactly this moment. I wore navy suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back professionally. I looked like someone who should be taken seriously. Thank you for coming, I began. I'm here to address questions about the recent investigation and my role in bringing evidence to light. I made my statement. Professional development followed by ethical responsibility. Not revenge, not vindictiveness, justice. The questions came rapid fire. I answered honestly, maintained composure, refused emotional bait. When it ended, Rosalind squeezed my shoulder. Perfect, masterful. But as journalists left, my phone buzzed. Parking garage, level B3. Come alone. It's not a threat, an offering. P. Paxton, I showed Rosalind. Don't go, it's a trap. Or he wants to negotiate surrender. I'm going. Level B3 was dimly lit, largely empty. Paxton stood beside a black car. Thank you for coming. What do you want? He handed me a folder. The truth about why this happened. Inside, photographs of younger Rosalind and Callister together. News clippings about their engagement. A letter, you chose safety over partnership. I hope it was worth it. Rosalind and Callister were engaged 15 years ago, Paxton said. He broke it off 3 weeks before the wedding. She disappeared, built her fortune, came back transformed. She's been systematically positioning to destroy everything he built. She didn't hire you because you were brilliant, though you are. She hired you because you were perfectly positioned to take down the company from inside while having legitimate grievances that made you seem like a whistleblower rather than an agent of revenge. The words hit like vertigo. She's been funding investigations for 3 years, he continued. She fed information to reporters. She positioned you as the righteous underdog because it gave perfect cover for corporate warfare. You were never her strategic director. You were her weapon. Why tell me this? Because you deserve to know you've been used. Again, first by Callister, who undervalued you. Now by Rosalind, who overvalued you while exploiting your grievance. Different methods, same result. You're the tool, not the craftsperson. He got in his car and drove away. I returned to the office, bypassed Rosalind, went to my own office to think. Was Paxton telling the truth? His evidence looked legitimate, but he was facing destruction. Of course, he tried to turn me against Rosalind. My phone rang. Callister. Don't talk to Paxton. Whatever he told you. Is Rosalind your ex-fiancée? Silence. Yes, he finally said. We were engaged. I ended it. Badly. She's resented me ever since. And did she hire me to destroy you? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. But that doesn't make what she hired you for wrong. You exposed real corruption. The fact that her motivations were partially personal doesn't invalidate the legitimacy of what you discovered. It makes me a weapon. Then don't be a weapon. Be the person who decides what the truth is worth regardless of who benefits. I hung up and sat surrounded by luxury, thinking about tomorrow's testimony before federal investigators. Tonight, I had to decide what version of truth I'd tell. I pulled up my testimony draft and rewrote it, not to protect anyone, not for revenge, just to tell the truth as clearly as I understood it. The testimony took 6 hours. Federal investigators, stale coffee, fluorescent lighting, recording devices. I told them everything. Working for Callister, discovering financial irregularities, Paxton's shell companies, the disinformation campaign. And then, under oath, I told them about Rosalind's history with Callister, about her possible motivations for hiring me. So you're suggesting Ms. Chevalier used you to settle a personal vendetta? I'm suggesting motivations are complicated. She genuinely recognized my capabilities and compensated me fairly. She also positioned me strategically to damage her former fiancé's company. Both things can be true. What matters for your investigation is whether the corruption I reported was real. And it was. Regardless of why I was positioned to discover it, the financial irregularities at Vance Global were genuine, documented, prosecutable. When the testimony ended, I walked out into autumn sunlight, feeling exhausted and oddly free. That evening, I met Imani at our cafe. You're famous, she said. Every outlet is covering your testimony. You're being called crusading whistleblower or calculating opportunist, depending on who's writing. Both, probably. Turns out you can be right about corruption while also being used by people with complicated motivations. How do you feel? Tired, relieved, uncertain. I exposed real wrongdoing, but I also participated in someone's revenge scheme. I was undervalued by one powerful person and overvalued by another for strategic purposes. So I feel like I finally understand how this industry actually works. Everyone's using everyone else, and the only control you have is choosing which uses align with your principles. That's dark. That's honest. That evening, Rosalind called me to her office. You told them about me and Callister, about my possible motivations. I was under oath. I told the truth. The truth is more complicated than you presented. Yes, Callister and I have history. Yes, I've spent years positioning to demonstrate I'm more capable. But I didn't hire you to destroy him. I hired you because you're brilliant, and he was too stupid to recognize it. The fact that your brilliance could be used strategically was bonus, not primary motivation. Can you prove that? Can you prove otherwise? Motivations are internal, actions are external. I compensated you fairly. I valued your insights. I gave you opportunities Callister had suppressed. Whether I also enjoyed the strategic positioning is irrelevant to whether I genuinely recognized your worth. She had a point. Where does this leave us? That depends on you. You can resign, believing you were manipulated. You can stay, accepting that all employment involves strategic positioning. Or you can evolve, recognize you're not a weapon or tool, but a strategic thinker who can choose which battles align with your principles. That's convenient for someone who benefited from my positioning. It's also true. You exposed real corruption. You held powerful people accountable. The fact that I benefited doesn't negate the legitimacy of what you accomplished. I studied her. I need time to decide what I want, to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by being useful to someone powerful. Take it, paid leave, come back when ready, or don't. Either way, you've proven yourself. 2 weeks later, I made my decision. I called Rosalind from a coffee shop where Simone Meridian's architecture studio overlooked the city. I'm not coming back to North Haven. Not because you're wrong, but because I'm ready to build something entirely mine. Your own firm, strategic consulting, development partnerships that honor legacy and community. The approach we used for Meridian but applied broadly. I have 3 clients already, including the Meridian family. You'll be competing with me. I'll be competing with everyone. Fair and square. No revenge, no warfare. Just good strategy and ethical practice. She was quiet. I'm proud of you and glad I hired you, whatever my motivations were. Thank you for recognizing me, even if it was also strategic. Everything's strategic. The question is whether strategy aligns with your values. Apparently, yours does now. 6 months later, Callister emailed, I've been rebuilding. Smaller company, better practices, actual partnerships instead of acquisitions. Would you consider advising? Not as employee, as equal partner. I know I have no right to ask, but I've learned from the best, and the best was you all along. I stared at the proposal for a long time. Then, I'll consider it. But first, I need to see evidence of actual transformation, not just rebranding. Show me what you've built. Show me how you treat your team. Show me you've learned to value people before profit. Then, we'll discuss partnership. 6 months after that, I toured his new company. Smaller offices, staff of 30, projects focused on sustainable development and community partnership. It wasn't perfect, but it was genuinely different. I built this, trying to honor what you taught me, Callister said on a construction site for affordable housing. That success doesn't have to come from exploitation, that partnerships create more value than conquests. And your motivation, genuine evolution or strategic rebranding? Both. I want to rebuild my reputation, but I also want to be someone I'm not ashamed of, someone who uses power to create rather than extract. You showed me that was possible. I looked at the housing project. Genuinely affordable, beautifully designed, thoughtfully integrated. Conditional partnership, 1-year trial, Equal decision-making. If you revert to old patterns, I walk with no penalties. Deal. We shook hands, former employer and former assistant, now partners, both transformed. 18 months later, I sat in my office in the converted building housing my consulting firm. 3 floors, 20 employees, projects proving development could be ethical and profitable. Callister's partnership evolved into something genuinely collaborative. We challenged each other, disagreed frequently, built things we were both proud of. Rosalind and I had coffee quarterly. Former employer, forever complicated, mutual respect. Paxton faced federal charges, lost most of his wealth. Last I heard, he was writing a memoir. I wouldn't read it. The Meridian Towers transformed into mixed-use spaces, honoring history while serving contemporary needs. And I'd become someone I barely recognized from 3 years ago. Not because I'd changed fundamentally, but because I'd finally allowed myself to take up the space my capabilities deserved. My phone buzzed. New inquiry. Young professional looking for advice on dealing with a boss who undervalues me. Heard you had experience. Can we talk? I smiled and typed. Absolutely. But first, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me. Your value exists independent of anyone's recognition of it. Walking away from someone who underestimates you isn't giving up. It's choosing yourself. And sometimes the best revenge is becoming so magnificently yourself that their world seems small in comparison. Call my office. Let's talk about building your empire instead of supporting someone else's. I hit send and looked out my windows. The view I'd earned, the life I'd built, the person I'd become by refusing to stay adequately useful. The story hadn't ended with Callister's downfall or my vindication. It had ended with both of us transformed. Him learning accountability, me learning my worth. And that was the most satisfying ending of all. Not destruction or victory, but evolution. Not revenge, but revolution. The quiet kind that happens when someone finally stops performing for approval and starts building for themselves. If you enjoyed this journey through betrayal, corporate warfare, and the complicated path from being underestimated to becoming legendary, subscribe to Mr. Douglas Stories for more tales about rising from the ashes of someone else's empire to build your own kingdom. Because every person who walks away from toxicity walks toward their own power. Every assistant who becomes a strategist proves that your title doesn't define your value, and every ending is really a beginning in disguise. Hit that subscribe button for more stories where every fall becomes a rise. You were never just adequately useful. You were always extraordinary. You just needed to stop waiting for permission to prove it.